The wind carried dust devils across the cracked earth, and Marcus Thorne watched them from his porch with the hollow expression of a man who had forgotten how to hope. His farmland stretched before him like a graveyard of ambitions, the soil so dry it crumbled to powder between his fingers, the fields barren except for the skeletal remains of crops that had withered months ago, when the drought first clenched its fist around the valley. The house behind him sagged on its foundation, missing shingles from the roof, paint peeling in long strips that curled in the merciless sun. His father had built this place with his own hands 40 years ago, back when the land gave generously, when the river ran full and clear. Marcus had inherited it 3 years past, along with the debts, the failing well, and the weight of every disappointed ancestor who had believed this soil would sustain their bloodline forever. He was 32 and felt ancient, his hands calloused and cracked, his back perpetually aching from hauling water from the distant creek, his eyes squinting against the glare of a sun that seemed determined to bake every living thing into submission. The nearest town was a 2-day ride, and the last time he had gone, the merchants had looked at him with pity when he tried to barter for seed. There was nothing to barter with. No crops meant no income. No income meant no supplies. The spiral tightened daily. Marcus had considered abandoning the farm 100 times, but where would he go? This dusty, dying land was all he had ever known, all he had left of his family, all that stood between him and becoming another rootless wanderer begging for work in towns that had no use for failed farmers. So he stayed, rationing the last of his grain, mending tools with wire and prayer, watching the horizon for rain clouds that never came. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought the heat had finally broken his mind, because nothing about the figure approaching from the east made sense. She was too large, too green, too deliberate in her stride across land that should have been impassable to travelers on foot. Marcus stood slowly, shading his eyes, his heart beginning to hammer as the figure resolved into clarity. An orc. He had seen orcs before, but only at a distance. War parties moving through the hills during the border conflicts 5 years back, or traders at the frontier markets who kept to themselves and left before dark. Never alone. Never a woman. Never walking straight toward his property as if she had every right to be there. She was tall, easily matching his own height of 6 feet, with shoulders broad and strong beneath a travel-worn leather vest. Her skin was a deep green, like summer leaves just before they turned, and her black hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung past her shoulder blades. Even from a distance, he could see the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw, the pointed ears, the cautious but determined set of her features. She carried a pack on her back and a walking staff in one hand, and she moved with the careful economy of someone who had been traveling for a very long time. Marcus's hand drifted to the rifle propped beside the door, but he did not pick it up. She was alone, and she was not advancing with any aggression, merely walking the road that technically passed through his land, though calling it a road was generous. It was barely a track, unused for months. She stopped at the boundary of his property, where the fence post still stood even though most of the fencing had rotted away. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the dusty expanse. "Water," she called, her voice carrying easily across the distance. "I need water. I can pay." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct warned him that this was dangerous, that orcs meant trouble, that he should send her away. But his eyes caught on the way she swayed slightly, the staff taking more of her weight than it should, the dried dust caked on her clothing and skin. She looked like he felt. "Desperate. Well's nearly dry," he called back. "Creek's a mile that way," he pointed south. "I have been to the creek," she said. "It is fouled. Something died upstream. Marcus cursed under his breath. That explained why he had been sick last week. He had a rain barrel with perhaps 3 gallons left, water he had been saving for drinking. 3 gallons stood between him and a very dangerous walk to the next water source, 3 days north. The orc woman had not moved. She simply stood there, waiting, her dark eyes fixed on him. "I have coin," she said, reaching slowly into her vest. She pulled out a small pouch and shook it. The clink of metal carried across the space between them. "Silver, for a drink and to refill my water skin, then I will leave." Silver. Marcus had not seen silver in 8 months. Silver could buy seed, could buy supplies, could buy time. He picked up a bucket and walked down from the porch, crossing the dusty yard to the rain barrel sheltered on the north side of the house. The orc woman watched him but did not follow, still standing at the property line as if waiting for permission. Marcus filled the bucket halfway, unwilling to spare more, and carried it toward her. He stopped 10 feet away and set it down in the dirt, then stepped back. "Come on then," he said. She moved forward slowly, her eyes never leaving his face, and knelt beside the bucket. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes, the chapped dryness of her lips, the way her hands shook slightly as she cupped them to scoop water to her mouth. She drank deeply, 3 handfuls, then paused, visibly restraining herself from gulping it all. "Thank you," she said quietly. She pulled a water skin from her pack, began to refill it with careful slowness. "Where are you headed?" Marcus asked, despite himself. "North. There are orc settlements in the mountains, 2 weeks' walk. I was told there is work there." "You came from the south," she nodded, securing her water skin. "The clan I was with, I am no longer welcome." Something painful flickered across her face, but she did not elaborate. She stood, reaching for her coin pouch. Marcus held up a hand. "Keep it. Water should be free." The orc woman froze, her expression shifting to suspicion. "Why?" "Because everything's already dying out here," Marcus said tiredly. "No point in making it worse." She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to read some hidden intent. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You are kind. That is rare." She hesitated, then added, "My name is Kora. Marcus." Kora shouldered her pack, gripped her staff. She looked at the farmland stretching around them, the cracked earth, the dead fields. "Your land is suffering. Everything's suffering. Drought. How long? 4 months since the last real rain. Well dried up 6 weeks ago." Marcus did not know why he was telling her this. Perhaps because she was a stranger who would be gone in moments. And there was a strange relief in saying the truth aloud to someone who had no stake in his failure. Kora's gaze moved across the property, taking in the sagging house, the empty animal pens, the tool shed with its collapsed corner. "You are alone here, just me." She looked back at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not pity exactly, but a kind of recognition, as if she saw something familiar in his situation. "I know about being alone on dying land," she said quietly. Before Marcus could respond, Kora turned and began walking north, following the track away from his farm. He watched her go, the green-skinned figure growing smaller against the bleached landscape, and felt an odd pang of something he could not name. Regret, perhaps, or loneliness. The encounter had been the most human interaction he had experienced in weeks, even if she was not human. He picked up the bucket and returned to the house, trying not to think about how much water he had just given away. 3 days later, Marcus woke to the sound of hammering. He lurched from his bed, grabbing the rifle, his heart racing as he stumbled to the window. The sun was just rising, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose, and in that early light he saw her. Kora, the orc woman. She was at the collapsed corner of his tool shed, wearing the same travel-worn clothes, her black braids swinging as she worked to prop up the sagging roof with a salvaged beam. Marcus ran outside barefoot, his shirt unbuttoned. "What are you doing?" Kora looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Fixing this. It will collapse completely in the next strong wind." "I can see that, but why are you here? You were heading north." She set down the hammer and turned to face him fully. In the morning light, he could see that she looked better than she had 3 days ago, less exhausted, though there were dark circles under her eyes. "I made it half a day north," she said. "Then I thought about what you did, giving water when you had almost none, asking nothing in return." She paused. "In my clan we have a concept called debt honor. When someone gives you life, you owe them life in return. You gave me water in the Deadlands. Without it, I would not have reached the next source." "That's not how it works," Marcus said, bewildered. "I gave you a drink." "You don't owe me anything." "Perhaps not in human custom," Kora said, "but in mine I do, and I have nothing to pay with except my labor." She gestured at the shed. "So I work. When the debt is satisfied, I will go." Marcus stared at her, trying to process this. "You came back to fix my shed." "And other things, if you allow it. I am strong. I can repair, can build. I saw your land. You cannot manage it alone, not in this condition. I cannot pay you. I am not asking for payment. I am offering debt balance." Kora's expression was serious, almost stern. "Will you accept, or will you send me away and dishonor us both?" Marcus did not understand orc customs, did not know if what she was saying was genuine or some kind of trick, but he looked at the shed, at the sagging roof that he had been meaning to fix for 2 months, and never found the energy or materials to address. He looked at her face, at the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself with a pride that was somehow both fierce and vulnerable. "Okay," he said slowly. "If you want to help, I will not stop you, but you should know this place is dying. I do not know if it can be saved." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Kora's mouth. "Then we are well matched. I do not know if I can be saved either, but we can try together." That was how it began. Kora worked from sunrise to sunset that first day, and Marcus found himself working alongside her, shamed into action by her relentless energy. Together they stabilized the shed, replaced rotted boards with salvaged wood from an old fence, rehung the door that had been dragging in the dirt for months. She was strong, stronger than him, and she could lift beams he would have needed a lever to move. But she did not lord it over him, simply used her strength where it was needed and waited for his instruction on how things should be done. "Why did your clan cast you out?" Marcus asked as they worked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Kora's hand stilled on the board she was holding. For a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "I defended a human child. There was a raid, a farmstead on the border. The warriors were going to kill everyone. I stood between them and a little girl. I was exiled for betraying the clan." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "The warriors killed the others." "Yes, but you saved the child. I tried. I do not know if she survived after I left." Kora's voice was flat, carefully emotionless. "The clan law was clear. I chose humans over orcs. That is unforgivable." "You chose a child over murderers," Marcus said quietly. "That is not the same thing." Kora looked at him then, really looked at him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been pain or gratitude or both. "That is what I told myself. But it does not change the outcome. I have no clan now, no family. I am alone." "So you travel to the north to find work." "To find anything," she corrected. "Purpose. A new clan, perhaps, one that will overlook my exile, or simply a place where I can survive." She returned to her work, fitting the board into place. "Your turn. Why do you stay on dying land?" Marcus hammered a nail, buying himself time. "Stubbornness, maybe. This was my father's farm and his father's before that. Feels like giving up on them if I leave. Even if staying means dying with it, even then. Kora made a thoughtful sound. Humans and orcs are not so different. We both carry the weight of our dead. They worked in silence after that, but it was a different silence, less wary, almost comfortable. That night, Marcus offered Kora a place to sleep in the house, but she refused, saying she would make camp in the barn. He did not argue, understanding that there were lines neither of them was ready to cross. He brought her a blanket and some of his dwindling food supply, dried meat and hard bread, and she accepted with a nod of thanks. "Tomorrow," she said, "we should address the well. If we cannot bring water back, nothing else matters." Marcus wanted to tell her the well was hopeless, that he had already tried everything he could think of, but he just nodded. Tomorrow, then. He returned to the house and lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind and thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. 3 days ago he had been alone and resigned to failure. Now there was an orc woman sleeping in his barn, talking about saving his well. It felt like a dream, unreal and fragile, but when morning came, Kora was still there. They spent the next week working on the well, and it was brutal, exhausting labor. The well was 30 feet deep, hand-dug by Marcus's grandfather decades ago, lined with stones that had shifted and collapsed in several places. Marcus had been drawing from it with a bucket on a rope, but the water level had dropped until even that was impossible. Kora volunteered to go down into the well, and Marcus tried to argue, but she pointed out that she was stronger and could handle the physical demands better. They rigged a rope harness, and Marcus lowered her into the darkness, his arms straining against the weight, his heart in his throat every time he heard stones scraping or shifting below. "There is a blockage," Kora called up, her voice echoing. "Stones have fallen. I am going to clear them." For 3 days, Kora descended into the well each morning and hauled up buckets of broken stone and debris, while Marcus worked the rope and sorted the material above. It was slow, dangerous work. Twice, more stones shifted and Marcus had to pull her up quickly, both of them breathing hard, covered in dust and sweat. But Kora always insisted on going back down. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked on the 3rd day as he helped her out of the harness during a break. "This is more than dead honor. This is risking your life." Kora wiped dirt from her face, took a long drink from the water they had been rationing carefully. "When I was exiled," she said, "I walked for days without direction. I thought about ending it, about letting the heat take me. Then I came to your farm and you gave me water when you had none to spare. You reminded me that there is kindness in the world, even in the worst places." She met his eyes. "Maybe I am doing this because I need to believe that broken things can be fixed. The well, the farm, me." Marcus had no answer for that, no words adequate to the weight of what she had shared. So he simply nodded and helped her back into the harness, and together they returned to the work. On the 4th day, Kora cleared the last of the blockage and found water seeping through the lower stones. They reinforced the walls with salvaged timber, restacked the fallen stones, and when they finally drew up a bucket from the repaired well, the water came clear and cold. Marcus stared at that bucket as if it were a miracle, because it was. He had been convinced the well was dead, that his farm was dead, that he was simply waiting for the final end. But here was water, real water enough to sustain crops, animals, life. "We did it," he said, his voice rough. Kora was sitting on the edge of the well, her arms braced on her knees, exhaustion written in every line of her body. But she was grinning, her small tusks catching the sunlight. "We did." Without thinking, Marcus reached out and gripped her shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and shared triumph. She went very still under his touch, her eyes widening slightly, and he realized what he had done, that he was touching her, that he had crossed some invisible boundary. He started to pull away, but Kora's hand came up to cover his, holding it in place. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For letting me help, for trusting me." "Thank you for coming back," Marcus replied. "I would have died here without you." They stayed like that for a moment, connected by touch and exhaustion and something neither of them could name. Then Kora released his hand and stood, stretching her shoulders. "Now we plant," she said, "if we can get seed." "I have a little stored," Marcus admitted. "I was saving it, but I had no water to grow it. Now." He looked at the bucket of clear water, felt hope stirring for the first time in months. "Now we have a chance." They planted the next day, turning over the hardened soil with tools that had been idle for too long, working it until it was soft enough to receive the precious seed. It was back-breaking work, and Marcus's stores were pitifully small, enough for only a quarter of his fields. But it was a start. Kora worked beside him without complaint, her strong hands moving with surprising gentleness as she placed seeds in the furrows. She asked questions about the crops, about how deep to plant, how much water they would need, and Marcus found himself explaining techniques his father had taught him, knowledge he had thought would die with him. "You are a good teacher," Kora said as they worked. "You are a good student," Marcus replied, "and a better worker than I deserve." "You deserve more than you think," Kora said, not looking at him. "You have been alone with your failure for too long. You have forgotten your worth." Marcus did not know how to respond to that, so he focused on the planting, on the simple rhythm of dig, plant, cover, move forward. But her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat on the porch and shared a meal of rabbit that Marcus had snared and vegetables from the last of his preserves. It was not much, but it tasted better than anything he had eaten in months, perhaps because he was sharing it. "How long will you stay?" Marcus asked, the question he had been avoiding for days. Kora was quiet for a moment, chewing slowly. "The debt honor is satisfied," she said finally. "The well is fixed. You have water. I could leave tomorrow and the balance would be even." Marcus felt his chest tighten. But the crops need tending, and there is much work left to do." She glanced at him. "If you would have me, I could stay through the harvest. By then, you should be stable enough to manage alone." "I would have you," Marcus said quickly, then felt his face heat. "I mean, yes, if you are willing to stay, I would welcome the help." Kora's expression softened, something almost like amusement in her eyes. "Then I will stay." Relief flooded through Marcus, stronger than he expected, and he realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in the past week, he had stopped thinking of Kora as a stranger or an orc or a temporary presence. She had become essential, a fixed point in his world, and the thought of her leaving felt like losing something vital. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Marcus woke before dawn and found Kora already up, tending to the small garden she had started near the house, using seeds she had carried in her pack, hardy plants that grew in orc lands. She taught him about herbs he had never seen, about ways to coax growth from reluctant soil. In turn, he showed her how to mend tools, how to read the sky for weather, how to manage the chickens he had traded for with a passing traveler. The crops they had planted began to sprout, delicate green shoots pushing up through the soil, and Marcus found himself checking them multiple times a day, marveling at the sight of growing things on his land again. Kora would stand beside him, her presence solid and reassuring, and they would discuss which areas needed more water, which plants were struggling, how to protect the tender growth from the harsh sun. They repaired the animal pens and the fencing, rebuilt the chicken coop, patched the roof of the house. Every day brought new tasks, but they were no longer overwhelming. With Kora's help, The impossible became merely difficult, and the difficult became achievable. Marcus began to notice small things about her. The way she hummed while she worked, a low, rhythmic sound that was almost like a song. The way she always rose before the sun, as if she could not bear to waste daylight. The carefulness with which she handled fragile things, seeds and seedlings and the chicks that hatched in the coop, her strong hands capable of remarkable gentleness. The way she smiled when she thought he was not looking, a small, private expression that made his heart do strange things. He caught himself watching her more than the work, and had to consciously redirect his attention. One evening, about 6 weeks after Kora had returned, a group of travelers passed by the farm. 3 men on horseback, dusty and armed, heading south. They stopped to ask for water, and Marcus, remembering his own thirst, agreed. But when they saw Kora standing in the yard, their demeanor changed. "You got an orc living here?" the leader asked, his hand drifting toward the sword at his belt. "She is helping with the farm," Marcus said carefully, positioning himself between the men and Kora. "Helping?" the man spat in the dirt. "Orcs do not help, they raid and they kill. You are either a fool or a collaborator." Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sudden. "She has done more for this land in 6 weeks than anyone else has in 6 years. She is welcome here." The second man leaned forward in his saddle. "There is a bounty on orcs in the southern territories, 20 silver for proof of kill. You could be a rich man." "Get off my land," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." The men exchanged glances, weighing their options. Marcus was alone, or so they thought, but Kora stepped forward, placing herself at his shoulder. She said nothing, but her hand rested on a heavy rake leaning against the fence, and her posture made it clear she would fight if necessary. The leader sneered, but he pulled his horse around. "You will regret this, farmer. Orcs bring nothing but ruin." He spurred his horse, and the 3 of them rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Marcus let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "Are you all right?" Kora was staring after the riders, her jaw tight. "You should not have defended me. They could have killed you." "They could have tried," Marcus said, "but I was not going to let them hurt you." "Why?" Kora turned to him, and there was something fierce and vulnerable in her expression. "Why would you risk yourself for me? I am just an orc. We are not even the same people." "You are not just anything," Marcus said, the words coming out more intense than he intended. "You are Kora. You saved my farm, probably my life. You work harder than anyone I have ever known. You are." He struggled to find the right words. "You are important to me." Kora stared at him, and in the fading light he could see the conflict on her face, the desire to believe him warring with years of being told she was less, was other, was monstrous. "You do not know what you are saying," she said finally. "If people find out you harbor an orc, they will turn against you. The town will not trade with you. You will be outcast like me." "Then we will be outcast together," Marcus said. "I am not sending you away." For a long moment, Kora said nothing. Then she reached out slowly and took his hand in hers. Her palm was warm and calloused, her grip strong. "You are a strange man, Marcus Thorne," she said softly, "and perhaps the best I have ever known." Marcus's heart hammered in his chest as he looked at their joined hands, green skin against pale, so different and yet fitting together as if they had always been meant to. He wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the enormity of what he was feeling, but all that came out was, "Stay." Not just through the harvest, stay. Kora's eyes were bright, and he thought he saw tears gathering there, though she blinked them away. "You do not know what you are asking." "I know exactly what I am asking," Marcus said. "I am asking you to stay because this place is better with you in it. I am better with you in it. Marcus." Her voice broke on his name, and then she was pulling him into an embrace, her arms strong around him, her face pressed against his shoulder. He held her back, feeling the tremor in her frame, the weight of everything she had been carrying alone. "I will stay," she whispered against his shirt. "For as long as you will have me." "Forever, then," Marcus said, and meant it. They stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear, holding each other in the dusty yard of a farm that was slowly coming back to life, two outcasts who had found something neither had expected: home and each other. The crops grew tall and strong through the summer, their progress like a miracle to Marcus, who had spent so long watching things die. Kora worked tirelessly, but now there was a lightness to her that had not been there before, a softness in the way she looked at him when she thought he was not watching. He was watching, though. He could not seem to help it. They had not spoken again about what had passed between them that evening, but something had shifted. The accidental touches became more frequent, more deliberate. A hand on the shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed tools, standing closer than necessary as they worked. Each contact felt charged, significant, like they were building towards something neither was quite ready to name. Marcus found himself thinking about Kora constantly, even when she was right beside him. The sound of her laugh, rare but wonderful when he managed to coax it out. The concentration on her face when she was learning something new. The way she looked at sunrise, her green skin gilded by the early light, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human standards and everything to do with her. He was falling in love with her. He realized one morning as he watched her tend the vegetable garden, humming softly to herself. The realization should have been frightening, should have been complicated, but instead it settled into his chest like something inevitable and right. The question was whether she felt the same. He got his answer on a night in late summer, when the heat had finally broken, and the air carried the first hint of autumn's coolness. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the stars, and Kora was telling him about orc constellations, pointing out patterns he had never noticed. "There," she said, indicating a cluster of stars above the eastern horizon. "That is the warrior's path. We say that when an orc dies with honor, they walk that path to the ancestral lands." "Do you think you will walk it someday?" Marcus asked. Kora was quiet for a moment. "I do not know if I qualify anymore. I have no clan. I broke our laws. The ancestors may not welcome me." "Then their loss," Marcus said firmly. "Anyone who would not welcome you is a fool." Kora turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the starlight. "You have a generous heart, Marcus." "Only with you," he said, and then, because he could not hold it in any longer, "Kora, I need to tell you something." "I am listening." He took a breath, gathering his courage. "These past months, working beside you, living beside you, they have been the best of my life. You have given me back everything I thought I had lost: hope, purpose, joy." He reached for her hand, found it waiting. "But more than that, you have given me yourself, and I find that I do not want to imagine a future without you in it." Kora's hand tightened on his. "Marcus." "I know it is complicated," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "I know that humans and orcs are not supposed to, that people will not understand, but I do not care about that. I care about you. I think I love you." The silence that followed was the longest of Marcus's life. He could hear his heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel the warmth of Kora's palm against his, could see the stars reflected in her eyes as she stared at him. "Say that again," she whispered finally. "I love you," Marcus said, clearer now, certain. "I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible jokes about dirt. I love how you sing to the plants when you think I cannot hear. I love that you came back to fix my shed because of some orc honor code I do not understand. I love you, Kora, all of you, and I do not care what anyone else thinks about it." A tear slipped down Kora's cheek, catching the starlight. "I thought I was alone," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "I thought I would always be alone, that what I did, saving that human child, meant I could never belong anywhere again. But then I found you, and you looked at me like I was not a monster, like I was just a person, someone worth knowing." "You are worth everything," Marcus said. "I love you too," Kora said, and her smile was radiant, transforming her face. "I have loved you since you gave me water when you had none to spare. I have loved you since you stood beside me in the well, trusting me in the darkness. I have loved you every day, and I was afraid to say it because I thought you could never feel the same." Marcus laughed, shaky with relief and joy. "We are both fools, then." "The best kind," Kora agreed. And then she was leaning in, and he was meeting her halfway, and their lips found each other in the starlight. Kissing Kora was like nothing Marcus had ever experienced. Her lips were soft despite her tusks, which he learned to angle around with a gentle tilt of his head. She tasted like the mint tea she had brewed that evening, and her hand came up to cup his face with such tenderness that his heart ached. He deepened the kiss, pouring everything he felt into it, and she responded in kind, her fingers threading through his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I want this," he said. "I want you, I want us. Whatever that looks like." "It will not be easy," Kora warned, but she was smiling. "People will talk, they may do more than talk. Let them. This farm has survived drought and debt and my own despair. It will survive gossip." He kissed her again, quick and firm. "We will survive it together." "Together," Kora echoed, and the word sounded like a promise. They sat together on the porch until the stars began to fade, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the harvest, for the winter, for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. When the sky began to lighten with dawn, Kora stood and stretched, then offered Marcus her hand. "Come," she said. "We have work to do, and I want to face it with you." Marcus took her hand and let her pull him to his feet, and together they walked into the new day, ready for whatever it might bring. The harvest came in better than Marcus had dared to hope. The crops they had planted flourished under Kora's attentive care, and the steady water from the repaired well, yielding grain and vegetables that filled the small storage shed to capacity. For the first time in years, Marcus had surplus, enough to sell and to store for winter. He and Kora loaded a wagon with the best of the harvest and made the 2-day journey to town together, and Marcus could feel the eyes on them as they traveled, the stares from other farmers and travelers who saw an orc and a human riding side by side. He ignored them all, keeping his attention on Kora, on the way she sat tall and proud despite the whispers. The town was worse. They arrived in the early afternoon, and the market square fell nearly silent as they drove the wagon through. People pointed, muttered, and more than one shopkeeper stepped out to glare. Marcus felt Kora tense beside him, but she kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. They set up at the edge of the market, and Marcus began to display their goods. For a long while no one approached, and he thought they might have to leave with the wagon still full. But then an old woman came over, her eyes shrewd as she examined the grain. "This is good quality," she said, sounding surprised. "It is," Marcus agreed. "Grown on my land, tended with care." The woman glanced at Kora, who stood silently at the wagon's edge. "She do the tending, we both did," Marcus said evenly. "We are partners." The woman's eyebrows rose, but she did not comment further. She bought a sack of grain, paying fair price, and that seemed to break the ice. Other people approached, drawn by curiosity and the quality of the produce. Some refused to buy when they realized an orc had helped grow it, but others did not care, interested only in the value. By the end of the day, they had sold half their stock and earned more coin than Marcus had seen in 2 years. He used some of it to buy supplies, including seeds for next year's planting, tools to replace the ones that were beyond repair, and on impulse, a length of green fabric that matched Kora's skin. "What is that for?" Kora asked as they loaded the wagon to leave. "You will see," Marcus said, smiling mysteriously. That night they camped on the road and Marcus presented her with the fabric. "I thought you could make a new shirt or a dress or whatever you want. You have been wearing the same travel clothes since you arrived. You deserve something new." Kora held the fabric up to the firelight, her eyes shining. "It is beautiful. Thank you." "You are beautiful," Marcus said, and watched her flush, the darker green of a blush spreading across her cheeks. They returned to the farm and fell back into the rhythm of work, preparing for winter. Marcus used the money from the harvest to buy lumber and supplies, and together, he and Kora reinforced the house, sealing gaps in the walls, replacing broken windows, ensuring they would be warm when the cold came. Kora sewed herself a new tunic from the green fabric, and Marcus thought she looked regal in it, like some warrior queen from the old stories. The first snow came in early November, dusting the farm in white, and Marcus stood on the porch, marveling at how different everything looked from a year ago. Then he had been starving and hopeless, waiting to die. Now the storage shed was full, the animals were healthy, the house was sound, and Kora was at his side. "What are you thinking?" Kora asked, coming to stand beside him, her breath misting in the cold air. "That I am grateful," Marcus said simply, "for all of this. For you." Kora leaned against him, her warmth seeping through his coat. "I am grateful too. I thought I had lost everything when my clan exiled me, but I found something better." "What is that?" "A home," she said. "A real one, not just a place but a person. You are my home, Marcus." He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "And you are mine." They kissed in the snow, soft and slow, and Marcus felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was what he had been missing all those months alone. Not just help with the work, but someone to share it with. Someone to build a life with. As winter deepened, Marcus and Kora settled into a comfortable domesticity. They spent the long, dark evenings by the fire, Kora teaching Marcus the orc language while he taught her to read human script. They cooked together, repaired tools together, planned for the spring planting together. At night, they shared the bed in the house's single bedroom, holding each other against the cold, finding warmth and comfort in closeness. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as they sat by the fire with Kora mending a shirt and Marcus carving a new handle for a hoe, that Marcus asked the question that had been building in his mind for weeks. "Kora," he said, setting down his work, "what do you want for the future? For us?" Kora looked up from her mending, her expression thoughtful. "I want this," she said. "The farm, the work, you, I want to build something that lasts." "So do I," Marcus said. He took a breath, his heart hammering. "Which is why I want to ask you something important." Kora set down her mending, giving him her full attention. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box he had been carrying for a week, ever since he had traded for its contents in town. He opened it to reveal a simple silver ring, unadorned but well made. "I know we have not been together long," he said. "I know that by most standards this is fast, maybe even crazy, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He met her eyes. "Kora, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, for the rest of our lives?" Kora's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes going wide. For a moment she simply stared at him, and Marcus felt a flutter of panic. Had he misread this? Was it too soon? Was he asking too much? Then Kora was laughing and crying at the same time, nodding frantically. "Yes," she said, the word half sob, half laugh. "Yes, Marcus, yes, I will marry you." Relief and joy crashed over Marcus in a wave. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the silver bright against her green skin. Then Kora was in his arms, kissing him fiercely, and he was kissing her back, both of them laughing into each other's mouths. "I love you," Kora said between kisses. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Marcus replied, holding her tight. "We are going to have a good life, Kora, I promise you." "We already do," she said, and he could not argue with that. They married in the spring, on the day the first shoots of new crops pushed through the soil. There was no minister, no official, no guests. Just the two of them, standing in the field they had brought back to life together, speaking vows they had written themselves. "I, Marcus Thorne, take you, Kora, to be my wife," Marcus said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to stand beside you in all things, to work with you, to laugh with you, to build a life with you. I promise to honor your strength and your kindness, to see you for who you are, not what others think you should be. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life." Kora's voice was thick with emotion as she spoke her vows. "I, Kora, take you, Marcus Thorne, to be my husband. I promise to share your burdens and your joys, to tend this land with you, to stand against any who would harm you. I promise to honor your courage and your heart, to be your partner in all things. I promise to love you fiercely and completely for the rest of my life." They exchanged rings, simple silver bands that Marcus had bought with the last of the harvest money, and then they kissed as husband and wife, sealing their bond in the presence of the land they loved and the sky above. That night, they celebrated alone, sharing a meal of the first spring vegetables and the last of the winter stores, and Marcus felt a completeness he had never known. This was what life was meant to be, not just survival but partnership, not just work but love. As they lay in bed that night, Kora's head on his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin, Marcus said, "Thank you for coming back that day, for fixing my shed." Kora laughed softly. "Thank you for giving me water, for giving me a reason to come back." "We saved each other," Marcus said. "We did," Kora agreed. She tilted her head to look at him, her dark eyes soft. "And we will keep saving each other every day." "Every day," Marcus echoed and kissed her forehead. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts, though never as severe as the one that had nearly killed Marcus's farm. There were hard winters, crop failures, accidents, and illnesses. People from town occasionally made the journey out to harass them, shouting slurs or throwing rocks, though they always left when Marcus and Kora stood together, united and unafraid. But there were far more good times than bad. The farm thrived under their joint care, becoming one of the most productive in the region. Word spread of the quality of their crops, and buyers came from farther and farther away, willing to overlook the presence of an orc for the sake of good produce. Some even came to respect Kora, seeing her work ethic and her skill, recognizing that the prejudice they had been taught was hollow. In the second year of their marriage, a young orc man arrived at the farm, half-starved and desperate, having been cast out by his clan for refusing to participate in a raid. Kora and Marcus took him in, gave him food and shelter, and eventually offered him work. His name was Dran, and he became like a brother to Kora, a son to Marcus. Others followed. A human woman fleeing an abusive marriage, an elderly orc who had nowhere else to go. A pair of orphan children, one human and one orc, found wandering the road. Marcus and Kora turned no one away, and slowly, the farm became more than just a homestead. It became a refuge, a place where the outcasts and the lost could find acceptance and purpose. They built new structures to house everyone, a bunkhouse and an expanded barn, and the fields grew to accommodate the additional labor. What had once been a dying patch of dust became a thriving community, a place where humans and orcs worked side by side, where the old hatreds were left at the gate. Marcus watched it all with a sense of wonder. He had thought in his darkest days that he would die alone and forgotten on failing land. Instead, he was surrounded by family, not of blood but of choice, and the land was rich and generous. It was Kora who had made it all possible. Her courage, her compassion, her willingness to return to a place that had shown her one small kindness and turn it into something lasting. She was the heart of everything they had built, and Marcus fell more in love with her every day. On their 5th anniversary, they stood together on the porch at sunset, watching the fields sway in the evening breeze. Dran was leading a group in harvesting the late summer wheat, singing an orc work song that the humans had learned to join in on. The children were playing near the well, their laughter carrying across the yard. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, and the smell of cooking wafted through the air. "Look at what we have made," Kora said, her hand finding Marcus's. "Look at what you made," Marcus corrected gently. "I was ready to give up. You reminded me how to fight." "We made it together," Kora insisted. She turned to him, her eyes bright. "And we are not finished yet. There is still so much to do, so much to build." "Then we will build it," Marcus said, pulling her close. "Together, always together." Kora smiled, that radiant expression that still made his heart skip. "Always," she agreed. They stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, two people who had found each other in the wasteland and created an oasis. The land that had once been barren was now green and thriving. The house that had been crumbling now stood strong, and the man who had been alone now had a family. Marcus had thought he had nothing left but dusty land and broken dreams. But then the orc had arrived, and she had given him back everything. His land, his purpose, his hope, and most precious of all, his heart. He looked at Kora, his wife, his partner, his love, and knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive. Not because he had been saved, but because he had found someone worth being saved for. Someone worth building a life with. Someone worth loving every single day for the rest of his life. "I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with 5 years of shared joy and struggle. "I love you too," Kora replied, and kissed him as the stars began to appear overhead. And in that moment, standing on the porch of their thriving farm, surrounded by the family they had built from nothing, Marcus knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not grand or dramatic, but quiet and steady and real. He had nothing left but his dusty land, and then the orc arrived and gave him back everything. But more than that, she had given him herself, and that was the greatest gift of all. Together, they turned and walked back into the house, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm and overcome any obstacle. The farm that had almost died now teemed with life. The man who had almost given up now woke each day with purpose. And the orc who had been exiled for showing compassion had found a place where compassion was valued above all else. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had created something beautiful. As Marcus closed the door behind them, shutting out the night and sealing in the warmth and light of home, he offered a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought Kora to his door that desperate day. He had been given a second chance, and he intended to make the most of every moment. The dusty land was dusty no more, transformed by love and labor into something verdant and full of promise. And Marcus Thorne, who had once been alone and hopeless, was now surrounded by love, anchored by partnership, and filled with a joy he had never thought possible. All because an orc woman had knocked on his door asking for water, and he had been kind enough to share what little he had. That one small act of compassion had cascaded into a life beyond his wildest dreams, proving that even in the darkest times, a single spark of kindness could ignite a flame that would burn bright for years to come. Marcus and Kora's story became legend in the region over time. Travelers would stop at the farm, drawn by tales of the human and orc who had built a sanctuary for the lost and forgotten. Some came seeking refuge, others came simply to see if the stories were true. All were welcomed, fed, and treated with dignity. The prejudices that had once seemed insurmountable began to crack and crumble in the face of such tangible proof that humans and orcs could not only coexist, but thrive together. It was slow progress, measured in individual minds changed rather than sweeping social movements, but it was progress nonetheless. And at the center of it all were Marcus and Kora, two people who had found each other at the end of their ropes and decided to climb back up together. They worked side by side every day, led their growing community with wisdom and compassion, and loved each other with a devotion that deepened with each passing year. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the community was settled, Marcus and Kora would often return to the porch where so much of their story had unfolded. They would sit together, watching the sunset, and Marcus would think about the man he had been before Kora arrived. That hollow, hopeless version of himself seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life. "What are you thinking about?" Kora would ask, as she so often did. "How lucky I am," Marcus would reply, as he always did, and it was true. He was lucky. Not because his life was easy or perfect, but because he had found someone to share it with. Someone who saw him at his worst and chose to stay. Someone who worked beside him, laughed with him, dreamed with him. Someone who loved him, not in spite of his flaws, but with full knowledge of them. Kora was his miracle, his second chance, his salvation. And he spent every day trying to be worthy of the gift she had given him by choosing to come back to his dusty, dying farm all those years ago. The farm was no longer dying. The land was fertile and productive, supporting not just two people but an entire community. The well ran deep and true, providing water for crops and livestock and the many people who now called this place home. The buildings were sturdy and well-maintained, expanded and improved over the years into a proper compound. But more than the physical transformation, it was the spirit of the place that had changed. Where there had once been despair, there was now hope. Where there had been isolation, there was now community. Where there had been prejudice and fear, there was now acceptance and love, and it had all started with a simple act of kindness. A cup of water given freely to a stranger who needed it. Marcus had learned that kindness was never wasted, that small acts could have profound consequences, that opening your heart to another person, even when it was frightening, could lead to unimaginable joy. As the sun set on another day at the farm, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink and purple, Marcus pulled Kora closer and felt her settle against him with the ease of long familiarity. This was his life now. This warmth, this peace, this love. He had nothing left but his dusty land, and then the orc arrived and gave him back everything and more.